Hello everyone, Marcus Dahl here, and today I'm going to be doing a slightly different kind of video. In case you guys didn't notice, last week towards the end, we had a lot of very good news in the realm of virtual reality. A lot of this news could be a little bit daunting for some of us to understand, and quite frankly there was so much of it I almost couldn't keep up. So, I figured since I'm going to be doing a quick recap myself, I might as well give you guys a small recap so you guys can more or less know a little bit of what exactly happened up here. And in case you guys noticed, there's a slightly different format to this video. I'm just a small little box right here. Since I figured that most of the meat of the stuff is going to be in the article I'm going to be showing here. And by the way, I'm going to be covering this into 3 different parts. This first one is going to primarily deal with NVIDIA's announcements during the release of their brand new graphics cards. The next video I'm going to be doing after this one, I'm going to be going into the information that came out of Oculus Connect, including the information on the Crescent Bay prototype. And in the last video, we're going to be going over basically my overall thoughts on the VR industry in some degrees. This is going to be coming about as of a result of a video that PBS channel did today on Sword Art Online, actually, whereby they tried wondering whether or not death, or, well, not so much death, whether or not people would really want to live inside of Sword Art Online. So, that out of the way, let's get this started. Do note that this is going to be a little bit more casual than most of my other videos. And also note, I am a little bit sick. It's not that bad, but in case you guys see me like rubbing my nose or rubbing my eyes, it's probably because of that. So, just letting you know ahead of time. Well then, without further ado, let's get this started. Okay, as some of you have probably been looking at, we are going to be discussing the NVIDIA Maxwell GPUs, the brand new graphics card line that they released last week, which currently consists of the NVIDIA GTX 970 and the NVIDIA GTX 980, all in the Maxwell architecture. Essentially, during the launch of this, they started announcing a bunch of the brand new features that came with their graphics cards, and most interesting to me, at least, was the fact that they started talking a lot about some virtual reality stuff, as you can see here, which I'm highlighting, virtual reality. So let's have a good look at some of the things that they were apparently adding into their systems in order to help improve things. First off, aside from the fact that having higher-end graphics processors is going to help things out, just know that there are some slight driver and other support features, so for any of you wondering, isn't it just graphics? Yeah. Oh, and by the way, even though I'm going to be talking about NVIDIA, guys, I don't expect AMD to be taking this line down. I mean, virtual reality has already got a bunch of big players. I mean, we have Facebook, Samsung, Google, a bunch of smaller little guys, and if Palmer Lucky is to be believed, apparently there might be a rumor going around that maybe a AAA developer might be going in on this. But aside from them, there's a lot of people with a good amount of stakes in virtual reality, and everyone can see the potential from the moment that you put on one of these. I mean, until you put on one of them, I might give you a reason to say, hey, Oculus, that's not real VR. For all of you who say there's not real VR, I know for a fact you either A, haven't tried this, or B, don't know what VR actually is by definition. So, taking a stance there, guys. I'm sick and tired of seeing those kinds of comments. I'm going to be covering that later. But anyhow, on to the actual discussion. With the new driver and system that they're placing, essentially they're trying to reduce the amount of latency that is inside of the graphics pipeline. As we can see, the standard VR pipeline right now has more or less 57 milliseconds of latency. I'm sure some of you are thinking, milliseconds? That's not much. But the reality of the situation is, guys, a lot of the things that we do in gaming happen in the millisecond scale. I mean, if you divide a single second by 60, like most games do whenever they're talking about 60 frames per second, we're talking around roughly 16 milliseconds of latency at best in certain things. So that's a lot. That's a very small window of time to be working with here. And just so you guys can know, right here they note that right now 57 milliseconds is more or less what we can be expecting in the current VR pipeline. That is well above the 20 milliseconds that would be preferable within virtual reality. And as a matter of fact, I do believe right around here, by the way, these are some notes I'm going to be having, going to be popping them up during the next video as well. Essentially, I believe it was actually John Carmack who was discussing more or less how much latency you would ever want inside of a VR system. And 20 milliseconds is apparently the peak that you'll ever want, because after that we might be able to work some prediction algorithms and some other things to help smooth things out. But past 20 milliseconds and we're going to start struggling with certain things. So we are well above double, if not almost triple, the latency with that. But with the latest update that they're working on right now, they've apparently managed to reduce this latency to the realm of roughly 25 to around 26 milliseconds. Guys, that is a reduction of almost by half, which, while still above the 20 millisecond line that we want, is a considerable improvement, and I think a very good step in the right direction. And essentially this was done by reducing the amount of frames, as they say right here, rendered in advanced from 4 to 1. That advanced framing is called a frame buffer. So the removal of that essentially removed what they say is 33 milliseconds from the pipeline. As we can see right here, there would be roughly 5 milliseconds from the game, 15 milliseconds from the OS. So in a preferable case, we would reduce these two a little bit, but for the time being, we have to try to reduce things from here. So it seems that they managed to cut out a lot of this, apparently even including the OS in this new paradigm right here. We have now 13 milliseconds on the GPU. That small little bit right there due to time warping, a new technique that they're doing. It's not actually manipulating time, guys, so it isn't something so fancy as we're going in, creating black holes, moving time slower and stuff like that. Essentially, all it means is that we're rendering frames in the game at a different rate as we're rendering them in the GPU. So, essentially, this helps to reduce latency, and if you talk to Carmack, you'll know that latency is a big thing that you want to reduce. So let's hope that moving forward we can help to reduce this a little bit more. But for now, I think this is a very good step in the right direction, and let's hope that NVIDIA and all the other graphics card manufacturers and other things like that will help take steps in the right direction towards this. Okay. Continuing onwards, we can see here a small little discussion here on the FPS necessary for VR. And the thing is, all they're basically saying is that they increased the performance and power of the NVIDIA GTX 980 and 970 is going to prove very helpful for that. Essentially, since, guys, 75 frames per second is a good amount, I'd say, but personally, even from my own experiences with the Oculus Rift, I can definitely see where we'd want to start hitting things like 90 frames per second, or, in my personal belief, 120 frames per second, before we're really starting to get a very good deal of comfort set up in the presence sense of things. But 120 frames per second, guys, that is brutal on processors, so you shouldn't be expecting it too easily without some very mean power to go along with that. And in terms of power, here we have one of the best solutions in the modern day whenever you want a little bit of a boost, SLI. The thing is, guys, I don't know if I mentioned this to you guys, but back in June, I actually took the time to build a brand new PC. I actually updated its case not too long ago with the NZXT Phantom 240, but essentially, guys, while I was building that PC, I was looking into graphics cards, and the thing is, I decided to go for the NVIDIA GTX 770, not only because it was the best thing that actually fit within my price range, but also because of the fact, guys, that VR in its current iteration did not play very well with SLI. The fact of the matter is, SLI, as is stated here, introduced another frame of latency into the pipeline, which, quite frankly, is kind of counterproductive to what we're trying to do to begin with. Let's see if I can find this right here. Yeah, there we are. SLI introduces a frame of latency, which, as we said, is kind of counterproductive. However, thanks to some improved techniques on NVIDIA's part, essentially, guys, we've been discussing this on Oculus VR forums for a while now. I've seen it been talked about all the time. But essentially, the idea was if we have two graphics cards and we're rendering out two displays, because quick little lesson here, guys. For any of you wondering how it is that the Oculus and other such things actually work, essentially, guys, we have here one single display. So this is the actual Oculus unit, and inside of here there is one display, kind of similar to your phone. The idea is actually, depending on your phone, it might actually be exact since it's the Galaxy Note 3's display that's in here, touch sensor and all. But essentially, the display there's only a single display, but we have two lenses here. and we're distorting the image on the display to fit into the lenses. But not only are we doing a distortion, we're essentially taking one image and breaking it down and splitting it up. Essentially, we have still the same big image, but now we're rendering it twice on each half of the screen. But that render is slightly changed a little bit in order to generate a 3D effect. So let's say an object is really close to you, like right now my hand is very close to my face. Essentially, the distance between the vision that my right eye and left eye see generates a 3D effect. This is called parallax, and it's actually used in astronomy in order to figure out the distance a star has from us right now. But in VR, at the very least, it's used to generate the effect of 3D depth. It's because of that reason that when you close one eye, something can lack any form of depth when you're observing it. So continuing onwards, essentially with the new method, the idea is, instead of having that one graphics card being stuck rendering the whole image twice, essentially we'll dedicate one graphics card to each half of the screen. So one graphics card handles the right eye and the other graphics card handles the left eye. This is a very interesting method of doing things, since it essentially means each graphics card is pushing out the horsepower necessary for the item. So performance-wise, we aren't going to see as much of a dip, and we can get all the benefits that SLI is going to provide in the processing power department, which means we'll be able to head towards higher rendering techniques a lot sooner. Because guys, if I had to say right now, if you talk to most VR enthusiasts, the dream release for the CV1 would probably be something along the lines of a 4K base display, essentially providing 4K by 4K pixels per eye. But we would also have, essentially, we would also provide that at 90 frames per second. That is an obscenely high bandwidth amount. In case you didn't wonder, HDMI, the cable that would be used to connect the display to your computer, does not have enough bandwidth to pull that off. We would have to upgrade to the brand new DisplayPort 1.3 standard, which, while it's not noted in this article, has been noted by a lot of reviewers to be provided a lot inside of the more recent graphics cards. Actually, DisplayPort 1. There are actually 3 DisplayPorts on the NVIDIA GTX 980 reference unit, which I find pretty awesome, since it means that DisplayPort does have some decent adoption in this industry. So let's hope that perhaps DisplayPort 1.3 might become a standard in time for 4K at 90 plus frames per second. But continuing onwards, essentially this means that with SLI at the very least, we're finally going to be able to pull that off a lot better, because right now, guys, no single graphics card on the market, including the 980, is necessarily ready to handle VR, or anything for that matter, at 4K very well, especially not near the 90 frames per second mark, unless you really want to push graphics back all the way from maybe medium settings down to perhaps low or even worse than that. But yeah, guys, the SLI is probably going to be really helpful towards our processing demands in VR going forward. Continuing onwards on the little article here, they also did cite that a number of their 3D games from their 3D Vision program, because guys, NVIDIA's been at the whole graphics game for a while now, and not too long ago, before the whole Oculus Rift and all that, the big talk of the day was 3D. The Nintendo 3DS tried to capitalize on 3D, Avatar popularized 3D, everyone was thinking 3D TVs, 3D. We were just going crazy over the idea of just getting 3D into everything. However, it didn't pan out too well by the looks of it, but it seems that NVIDIA is going to be able to take advantage of some of this by apparently managing to upgrade their previous NVIDIA 3D Vision technologies to take advantage of virtual reality. So, guys, well, VR, I believe, in my personal opinion, will be best served by software designed for virtual reality. At the same time, having a bit of extra software to help smooth the transition definitely isn't going to hurt us all in the long run, I believe. So, thanks to NVIDIA for providing the little feature there. I honestly wasn't expecting it at all. And that more or less does it for most of the things that they discussed in terms of virtual reality. Aside from that, they did talk a little bit about some other ancillary features that they have in their graphics card lines. I mean, we have Voxel Global Illumination, which, for those of you that don't know what Global Illumination is, the idea is, guys, that with current rendering techniques, we have these things called light probes, which is basically a small item or mark that sets up light in a direct fashion. Direct lighting, guys, is a form of it's basically a form of shading, guys. Like, if you look at my face right now in this video footage right here, you can observe that more or less right now most of the lighting is the same. But let's say I open up my window a little bit. As you can see, a huge amount of light just came onto the left side of my face, and my right half of the face isn't receiving this light. You can essentially call this a form of direct lighting, because only one half of the face is receiving it. But the thing is, guys, light doesn't work like that in real life, in most cases. Light generally tends to bounce off of things. So as you can see right now with the light on my ceiling fan, essentially it's going down, but the thing is it's going to be bouncing everywhere. So it'll hit a wall, and from that wall it'll bounce back onto you. So if my wall was a bright red, it's highly likely that I would have a lot more red, or the video would be a little bit more red, in showing that compensation of all that red light. So global illumination essentially does the exact same thing. Rather than just talking about the whole global illumination effect, I'm going to show it to you inside of Unity 5's engine. Because actually, guys, there's this thread I've been following on Unity by a user. Let's have a look at their username right here. Their name is Helios66. They've been providing some footage that they've been working on from within the Unity 5 engine. And while I personally don't have access to it right now since I'm not inside of the beta, essentially Unity 5 has a new global illumination system provided by the guys over at Enlighten. This has been used in games such as Battlefield 3, Plants vs. Zombies, Plants Warfare, and essentially just a few titles right there. And global illumination has been integrated directly inside of Unity 5, so we'll be able to see some of the effects of this in our indie games pretty soon as it starts coming out and being released. As you can see here, you can see the way light is just generally just bouncing off everywhere here, but a more direct sample here, let me see if I can find it. You know what, allow me a moment to skip ahead in the thread. There's actually a very good sample here on page 3 showing a bit of how global illumination works. Yep, here we go. As you can see, let's see if you can see a little bit here in the video footage, but essentially you can see that there's various lights intermingling within the scene. As he turns this light off, a lot of the blue light that was down there is being removed, and it's mixing a lot less. As you move around the scene, the lights are still changing in order to dynamically perform to this new changes. The thing with most lighting in games nowadays, guys, is that it's something called static, or baked. With lighting, that means that while it looks correct from the angle that you're seeing it in, if you were to take away an object, the lighting would not change. So essentially, it's just stuck there. So since the engines realize that most of the time those items don't change, they feel no need in order to change it. That's one of the benefits of baking. But let's say you have something that does change in position or starts moving around, that's when baked lighting starts to become a little bit more problematic for engine uses. So having things like global illumination will make it so that we have much more dynamic and vibrant lighting inside of our games. And once we start having this as a standard, it's going to be pretty useful. The thing is, guys, aside from Unreal, it seems that global illumination is not a feature within Unreal Engine 4 directly, since they found that it was a bit too processor intensive for some things. That does not mean Unreal Engine 4 looks bad by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, guys, Unreal Engine 4 is gorgeous in a lot of situations. However, the fact of the matter is, it would be nice to have a bit of global illumination, since from a development standpoint, it is still also pretty useful. So that's where NVIDIA's voxel global illumination should come in handy in equalizing the playing field. Although I do believe it's also going to be supported by Unity, although I'm not too sure. So I guess we'll see how that pans out in the future. Anyhow, aside from that, there's also dynamic super resolution. Guys, in case you're just wondering for what that really is, essentially all they're doing is, instead of rendering the frame that they're rendering on screen at 1080p, they'd render it at, say, 4K, and then downscale it, and then show you that image instead of taking the 1080p image and using that. Because the thing is, guys, with a lot of engines, instead of rendering at 1080p, they really render at like something like 720 or slightly below, and then upscale that with some slight effects in order to make it look right and still move fast. So by comparison, what they're doing is that they're taking a higher image and downscaling it. Since in case you guys didn't notice, no, in general, downscaling conserves and provides a much better image than upscaling does, which tends to provide a lot of pixelation. So their downscale technique essentially provides a very high, very well aliased, really nice image at the price of the processing power of 4K. Yeah, I'm not too sure whether or not that'll be all that useful for modern games, but then again, they did say that it was more targeted towards older games, which could use a slight bump in graphical effects in some areas. And finally, there's MultiFrame sampled anti-aliasing. This is actually a pretty interesting technique, guys. You see, with a lot of anti-aliasing, essentially they put these small probe items along where a line would go, and based on how close the line is in proximity to those points, it'll provide an aliasing shade in turn. But the thing is, providing more dots means it requires to get more data out of each frame. So what they're doing is, instead of having a dot in the same position in every frame, they alternate the position of the dot every single frame, which provides a much nicer or very similar image to having the actual two dots on in each frame. Effectively, a lot of people have been describing it as having the graphical quality of MXAA times 4 at the performance cost of MXAA times 2. Well, everyone, that just about does it for the information on the NVIDIA side of things. Let's hope that AMD announces their own solutions pretty soon. I actually do believe I saw a rumor in the Oculus VR forums that there might be some small driver details already being implemented in AMD or getting prepared to roll out. So let's see how that pans out later in the future. Well, guys, thank you very much for watching the video. Do share and like the video down below if you really like, in order to help support the channel. And do sound off in the comment section about your thoughts on all this, since quite personally, I think it's really great to see all the involvement on the technology community inside of virtual reality. Since, guys, I personally genuinely believe VR is the way of the future, so having a first step or a good step inside of the industry early on is probably going to be pretty helpful. But it's just great to see all the big, large companies already taking their measures with Facebook, Samsung, Google, and all sorts of other companies already trying to get in on the VR pie. Let's hope it helps things turn out good, and let's hope it doesn't end up like motion controls and 3D. Well, everyone, thank you very much for watching the video, as I said, and do remember, share it with your friends and have a good discussion. This has been Marcus Stahl, logging out.